Hey everyone.
Hey, hey, everyone. I'm Zora. With This is by Rig by Design. I have a special guest with me today. Her name is Nieta Greene. She is the CEO and founder of Diversity Community for Democracy. And we're going to have a lot of points that we will be discussing today. Today, we also are going to be discussing two things that may seem unrelated: housing, disability rights. But we just got finished, Naita and I just got finished having a discussion. I believe they're all related, but she may not necessarily believe that they're all related, and that's okay with us. But in my opinion, they're connected by a strategy called flooding the zone, where you are create so many crises at once and nobody is able to focus on one single thing. And today I really do want to focus in on what the reason why Naita is here today. Just to give everyone an FYI, Jason will be joining us midstream, so I may have to catch him up. He had a dentist appointment with his for his daughter, and so he'll be joining us as soon as he returns by that. Nita, I would like you to talk a little bit about yourself right now. Tell me what you're working on right now.
So I am the CEO and founder of Disability Community for Democracy, which was started after the election in 2024 because both parties actually ignore the disability community. So I was like, well, we need to do something. And for me, it's about who's in power, right? Like that's what that is about for me is that. It's not about it's not about, the current occupant and his co-conspirators or Project 2025 because we're dealing with a lot of the same issues around reinstitutionalization and housing for people with disabilities in democratic states. So that's why I feel very strongly that this is a human problem versus a political problem, and also the history of disability rights in this country. We wouldn't have Section 504 that's under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 if it wasn't for Nixon. Actually, we wouldn't have the EPA either if it wasn't for Nixon. I mean, I just like to keep it real. We wouldn't even have some of the expanded voting rights in the Voting Rights Act if it wasn't for Reagan. We wouldn't have the ADA and the expansion of the ADA if it wasn't for George H.W. Bush, who signed the ADA initially, and then his son, who basically said, "Nah, the Supreme Court got it wrong," and issued amendments to it. So that's why I come at it from more of a human lens, not a not the policy paper of 2025. Given, both parties treat disability like an afterthought.
Yeah, disabilities is a nonpartisan issue, is basically what I'm hearing from you. And I would agree with you with that. Um, so, how did you move forward into this type of work?
I've have a disability. I've been disabled my whole life. I'm a kid of the 80s and came of age in the 90s. And if you want to use like 25 as like, your brain is fully matured, then you would say the early 2000s, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, the way I see the world is through the lens of 504 was there, but segregation was still the norm in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, you had to educate people. We had to make sure people with disabilities got accessible education, but segregation was the norm. And when the ADA was signed into law, I was in middle school then. Um, that changed my world because I was able to say when I was, graduating, I don't want to be in resource room all 4 years of high school. And they had to give me my accommodations, which before They didn't necessarily have to. And so that's why what has changed the uh, world for me is how the ADA and then Olmsted, because I've, have been institutionalized due to my other disabilities. Like I have some, psychiatric things. And even in the 90s before the Olmsted decision, they would keep people even in private institutions longer than necessary because stabilization was not the goal like it is now because of the Olmsted decision.
Because and so the reason why you're on here today, and that brings us over into, is that the Olmsted decision was very important to the disability community. And so that's the reason why you're on here today. What has happened with the DOJ?
DOJ issued I have a question. Can I
Yes, you can
be
have
very
questions.
colorful in my language, but not
You
cursing,
can, but
but
the name of my publication is Bullshit Free Zone. So yes, you can be very
okay.
colorful and
Okay, this non-intelligent circular memo saying that the Olmsted decision doesn't say what the Olmsted decision says, and that how it was affirmed via courts is wrong, and that
right. They're claiming the interpretation was incorrect.
even though it's been almost 3 decades that
Correct.
it's been interpreted this way, and Stephen Miller, who is very problematic in every sort of situation in our country right now, is basically saying, "Hmm, nope, you don't have to, um, what the DOJ is doing is out of pocket," basically, w with the executive order that came out the week a few I think it was like a day or 2 before the 35th anniversary of
4 days.
the yeah, of the, Americans with signing
Olmsted. Right.
no, I'm not talking about Olmsted, but
Okay.
I'm trying to I'm linking the 2, why they wrote this memo. There's a couple pieces that are happening here. So, the memo was written due to Stephen Miller's influence because the DOJ was forcing states to do their job and follow the law, right? There's also a lawsuit happening with 6 states suing the federal government under the expanded regulations of the integration mandate of 504 under the Biden administration, and there are 6 states that are saying, "Nope, we don't have to do that." Those regulations that were written based on the Olmstead decision. And so we have 2 of these things happening at once, and of course, we have RFK's influence in all of this. And as much as, Stephen Miller is the one who's, kinda sort of, is the one who's saying, "Why is the DOJ doing all of this?" It's really RFK as far as I am concerned because he's the one I'm wearing a no autism registry shirt from my organization's store website.
I'm
It's
glad that you brought up RFK because I was making that similar link. Considering all the rhetoric RFK has been talking about the autism community is mind-boggling to me.
and
Maybe it's the
SSRIs and
I, cor-
saying and saying
correct.
saying saying how they're more addictive than heroin, which there is not any proof of that, and saying, they're very addictive, whatever, and I'm like, "Look, any sort of drug, any sort of medication that you're taking for a very long time, you need to taper off of." Like like, it is
Most definitely, but most of those drugs penetrate the brain barrier from a
right,
biological side, and so, yes, eventually, it's gonna have additional effects. I do have a son that suffers from epilepsy. He's part of the disability, community. He became disabled as a very young adult upon, graduating high school. Long story there. As a result of that, I understand how many of these medications affect the brain, and he has to take medications in order to control some of his seizures. So definitely understand that. But I do want to bring it back to the whole DOJ. Basically, what the DOJ is right now, and I think you're trying to get the words out, is what they did in this memo is they shift power to the states. And so that what the memo explicitly argues is that states should be allowed to decide for themselves. And so, what you're arguing is no, that's not the purpose of it. And the states do need to have these parameters in place. Otherwise, the states are, some of these states, especially the 6 states that are now arguing against implementing the 504 states, will then not implement it. And then what will happen from there? Marginalize this community.
People with disabilities, and it's not just the states. I'm going to expand this. It's also our U.S. territories because we talk a lot about the 50 states in D.C.,
Mhm.
but a lot of this plays into Medicaid funding and the way Medicaid funding is doled out, depending on which territory you live in, which programs you qualify for, and so these territories um, are pretty much all of them are majority minority. Puerto Rico is interesting because they consider Puerto Rico majority minority, but as a Puerto Rican myself, that's not necessarily true. Most Puerto Ricans, and I say this as somebody who has like my mom's father is Puerto Rican. He was white. Most Puerto Ricans
Right.
are white. They just don't
Yeah,
want to allow them to be white. That's the difference. So, with the exception of Puerto Rico, having an honest conversation about Puerto Rico, um,
absolutely.
is that these territories are also gonna use it as, well, the federal government said that we don't have to do this, and because we have it's a really technically three-tier citizenship system in this country because DC, DC can vote for president, but they can't, they don't have House and Senate reps. If you live in the territories, you can vote in the primaries, but you can't vote for president. You don't have voting representation in Congress. So we have a three-tier citizenship in this country. And then within our, 50 states where there's representation, it's depends on which state you live in. And so this is also gonna allow blue quote unquote blue states like California and New York to say, well, this DOJ memo said this. It kind of will allow them to justify expanding in who can be committed. That's
Well, who can be committed, or I wouldn't necessarily say expanding, but decreasing. It will be decreasing some of the things that some of these states are now currently providing. Um,
the reason why I say expanding
mhm.
is because specifically I'm going to talk about New York specifically. The current governor of New York held up the budget to be able to expand who can be involuntarily committed, and definition of that. That's why I'm
Yeah,
saying
and I get where you're going with that, and we're doing something similar here in California as well.
yeah.
And that's really kind of scary. And the reason why it's scary, you talk about one of these institutions that took place in the 1970s, and it was atrocious. And
Willowbrook.
what was correct? Talk a little
Willowbrook.
bit more about that because we need to understand the history in order not to repeat it.
So, there's been a lot of books written on Willowbrook and
Mhm.
other things, and I will say, anybody listening on Substack, my friend Alex Greene is a historian, dis disability historian. He can break down the history of all of this stuff. He specifically wrote a book, I don't remember the name of the book, it escapes me, but he wrote a book on somebody in Massachusetts, where I currently live, and so it's interesting that we have all of this proof that people were experimented on, people were left in their own, they were left
Eugenics.
dirty and, what's it called? They were left dirty and the whole 9 yards, and and Robert uh, F. Kennedy Sr. in
Mhm,
1965 basically said Willowbrook needed to be closed. This was in 1965. This was 8 years before Gerardo Rivera went in there with a secret camera in 1973, putting the horrors of Willowbrook, which is in Staten Island. I'm from the New York area originally. I grew up in Westchester County. So Willowbrook closed when I was a little girl.
mhm.
So it's for me personally, this is in my lifetime. And I'm like, hell no. And I've worked. So I've been a patient in in like New York City hospitals and county hospitals and in the private hospitals. I've never been in a state hospital, but the governmental hospitals are terrible. They're very abusive to patients, regardless if it's city or county or state. They're very abusive, and they have more power to keep you in because they are a government entity versus being in a private hospital. So that's why a lot of people who need, help want to go to a private hospital because you have more power. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. You go to the government for help, you know, And and we really need to talk about the fact, I mean, that they've always wanted to do this. They've always wanted to do this. Basically, I will say this, before, um, this is my point, before the current occupant and his co-conspirators, and I'm gonna just say this, they are pieces of crap that are that don't deserve to be are they're so awful. They nobody should want to have them on the bottom of their shoes. Like, they just, as far as I'm concerned, if there was a hell on earth, they you know
They deserve to be there,
they deserve to
and
be there.
yeah,
That's how I feel.
absolutely, absolutely, and I feel the same way. No amount they are what we used to describe as bottom feeders.
Yes, exactly. I think even bottom feeders are too good.
Maybe have a little bit more. Maybe they're beneath bottom feeders, bottom feeders. So, absolutely. And I do wanna say this now with this memo, this is an ancient history. These institutions were phased out in the 1970s, but they were phased out for reasons, and these are the governmental institutions. But what this memo is actually doing is bringing back that era. And I think you make a very good point is that we do need more private houses. I remember when here in California during the 1970s, actually it was early 80s here, because many of our government institutions were phased out during the Reagan administration.
Same in New York State, but actually into the 90s too. So
Mhm.
they were phased out under Bush 1 and Clinton. Some of the hospitals were closed even in the early 2000s even.
And so, what do you think is the connection between the disability rights and other civil rights movements?
Oh, the connection is basically like, ooh, 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 it's the humanity question, right? Like,
Mhm, correct.
we talked about this before we went on. We could ag we don't have to agree on how we get there, but humanity isn't up for debate. So, I that's why I use the term Crip Crow as a
I'm
person of
glad you
color
brought that up.
because I have gotten some pushback from specifically white disabled people, and I'm like, "Look, I know my history in this country, and it took another 20 years for people with disabilities to even get an education due to another Supreme Court case, and it was Black disabled students in DC who brought that case, and so just because you were Black, if you had a disability after Brown versus Board of Education, could still be segregated and they didn't have to educate you. And I wish people would understand nuance. Like, we have to have nuanced conversations around terms. And the reason why I use the term crip macro is that we have a history of laws in this country set up by these are local laws called ugly laws. It's 1860s to 1974. I took out a book. I have a book that I went to the library to get because I really want to like do a deep dive on ugly laws because I really want to like talk about it more in terms of the fights that we're having. These institutions want states and cities to bring back ugly laws. That's what they want. Like, and it's because they don't want to use the term because it's politically radioactive, right? And I'm not, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. It is. People don't like to see people in cages, right? People know about, and I'm going to just use the term that it was used. They know about the freak shows, right? That was the
Oh,
term
yes.
was
Oh,
used.
yeah.
People, when I remember learning about it in history class when I was in high school, and a lot of us were like upset. And so that's one, but also too, just to be clear, they're doing this because they want to weaponize disability. There's a term called protest psychosis. And I know you read my article this morning and I mentioned it. I kept my article very, very brief so people could actually do the work, but I am going to write more about it. They're doing this to be able to start saying if you dissent in any way, you're problematic. And Black folks, especially Black men, were diagnosed with schizophrenia who had any sort of views on civil rights. And and so this is not my like again, where I, like lie politically on a lot of things, people would be shocked. Like, you know, in terms of like my political views, but I believe in humanity. And I believe in liberation for people and people to be able to live, have the right, to liberty, life, and
And
happiness and to live the way they want to live. I'm more of like my own business, right? Like we can
let me live my life as
right.
I
And so that's why I'm saying the things I'm saying. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm saying like most of us don't know our history well enough and we have these things, cell phones, right? That we have access to information and there are so many people who are willfully ignorant now when you point out to people this is what's going to happen. No, it's not. Well, guess what? When it's your tu madre or your mama or your mommy, whatever term you call your mother, and when they come for her or your father or your siblings, and would try to tell you this is the same thing, black women specifically, black men, Jewish women, Jewish people, and the disability community all warned, were screaming, "Don't vote for this man." We all told you, and you didn't listen. And now you're crying in surprise, like, he told you what he was going to do. Did you not
he, he-
mention the first time where he killed almost 1,000,000 people? When the current occupation.
COVID.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's why I am very upset about this, and I'm also upset that Congress hasn't really said anything. So that's why, you know you know, second
Well, this is the Congress hasn't said anything because they're flooding the zone. So these type of stories are actually getting buried underneath the news. We're talking about underneath the um, Iranian war, underneath the Social Security Trust Act, underneath what is it now? The reflection pond. What?
They don't pay, but they've never paid attention to disability though. That's
No,
been really the issue. So, like for me, when people say, "Well, they're flooding the zone," disability has never been covered in the
part of the
press.
zone.
Yeah, it has never been covered in the press, regardless of who's in office. So, so I agree they are flooding the zone with so much, but they also did it the day before Juneteenth. And so that's a Friday, and so they thought people weren't gonna be paying attention. I found out about it. I'm just gonna tell people how I found out about it. I saw something on it on socials on Thursday. but I wasn't really paying attention, and then I got a DM from a subscriber saying this is what happening. I was in a meeting
Mhm.
talking about Northeast regional issues. And and then I got, like, a message from one of the volunteers. Disability Community for Democracy is all run by volunteers, and so I got a message from one of the volunteers wanting to write something about Homestead, and I said, "I'll do it. You need to focus
Okay.
on your stuff." And then I woke up angry. Angry to the point that I did a live and I went off. I went off. I did a solo live. I normally try to be, even if I use, colorful language, cursing or whatever, I try to still use it.
Colloquialisms.
Yeah, I try to maintain a level of decorum, but I just
Mhm.
couldn't.
Right.
I was, like, almost in tears because I know what these institutions have like. I've worked in a state hospital as a m peer advocate in the when the MAD movement was, like, up and, really exploding and, states were investing money in the early 2000s. I was a trained peer advocate, got a certificate from New York that was New York State certified. So I was able to go into state hospitals, to work in them. And I also worked in the state psychiatric clinics. So they're not great places. Even outpatient, they're not great. I mean, they're better than inpatient, but they're not great. And actually, um, I worked in the county facility briefly as part of my training, um, as well when it went quote unquote privatized, but the employees still worked. Like they were still government employees. They had still had their pensions. Yeah, it was my county. That was like they did it like this semi quasi whatever, and then the county took it back over. And so I know what these facilities are like. And so I'm saying this from personal experience. They're doing this because they don't want housing first. They're doing this because they don't see us as humane. They're not signing the he doesn't want to sign the bill because it has, like,
A
yeah,
bipartisan
the
bill,
bill
by the
that
way.
that passed with super majority. So if be just
I and to help you
just
out
makes
here, I
me
I know,
so sorry.
I do the same thing. I just lose my words. I don't know,
I just
the words do not come out
Yeah, I just
easily
lost it.
because I'm so angry about it,
It's not even
you know?
angry, I just don't have the words to talk about how the fact that they don't want to he doesn't wanna sign a bill because of the SAVE Act, which he's been told, "You don't have the votes." There are people who are saying, "We're regardless if you eliminate the filibuster in the Senate, we're still gonna vote no." So,
But it goes a
he's
little
not
bit
listening.
deeper than that. It goes a little bit deeper
No,
than that.
I don't wanna go super deep right now because
Right.
we can do
But
that.
when we were talking about the nuance of it, there is a little bit more. Right now, that bill has a possibility of not being passed at all because they are not they're I'm trying to think of the term, but it can get veto if the House does not come back to session. And it can be veto, and it most likely will because the House goes um, it becomes a closed house on June the 28th, right before July the 4th. They only had 10 days to get this to become a bill. So that's very important. It's not going to become a bill.
It's not gonna become law. Yeah, I
Right.
understand
I mean, a law. It's not going to
yeah, I
become a law.
understand the nuance on that, but what's gonna happen? Because this is what I think is gonna happen. There's gonna be enough political pressure placed on people in the House specifically, which Mike Johnson even said, like, "We don't have the votes that they can't get it through the Senate. They're not gonna change the filibuster for you. Go away. We'll do it through reconciliation." and and try it that way, and he's not having it. It's like, well, fine, force a vote, like force a vote, and let force a vote and see what happen, right? Like, they've already tried bringing this to the floor, and this is the other thing, and I think this is where Republicans are now starting to see, like, whatever they do with this person, they should have figured this out under the first administration that, his first term, he wasn't a regime then, that's why I call it the administration. The second, the current occupant and his co-conspirators, like, which is different for a reason. He showed who he was then. I wish people would have just stood up to him then, that even if he would have gotten elected, they should have just, um, grown up, and that's why I feel the way that I do about this. Like, I'm not trying to link all these, like, people are linking this to, like, all the different issues in the.
And it's what we do here on Rig by Design, because what we're showing is how each one of these things are connected. But it's connected to, as you say, the occupants, I call it the regime. We're not going to go tit for tat over that because of the fact that you and I agree on the humanitarian aspect of this. And so, with that being said,
Hi,
I
Nick.
yes, so Nick is on right now. The reason why I'm doing this show is because of Nick. What ended up happening was I was preparing my notes in order to do our usual Rig by Design. Jason has not been able to join us right now, but when I read this, I was unaware of it because of flooding the zone. I was actually unaware of it. It was something that I missed. And when I read it, I went, oh shit,
It
you
also
know.
wasn't covered in the press though either. I mean, let's just keep it real here. The only people covered it was Mother Jones and NPR. Was not, and CBS covered it like briefly, and I tried to click on the link and I couldn't find it. So this is the reason why I'm saying why I'm pushing back a little bit, because it's also how press covers disability issues. They're not covering it.
No, they're not. They're
And they've never
absolutely
covered
not.
disability issues.
Absolutely not. So,
Nick,
Nick, welcome.
Nick, we can't hear you, my friend. No. Yes.
We are talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if it's coming through my mic, my headphones, or the Mac mic. It's coming through something, but I'm glad y'all can hear me. Hey,
Yeah,
everyone.
I have the same
Oh,
difficulties
yeah.
with the Mac mic.
It's good to meet you.
Yes, Stacy, they should cover this. This is important. Disability issues are important. I don't know the statistics of how many individuals suffer from disabilities. I
Almost
have a disability, which I do not discuss very much. Um, but what are this? Do you happen to know
almost 30% of the US population according to CDC's the CDC stats.
Okay,
So it's
almost
over
30%. I think it's higher. And say,
it is probably higher, but I'm I'm just quoting the official stats. That's what like, that's what we have to, unfortunately go by, is that.
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm on basically saying is that, yes, I agree with you. This should be covered more. I am thankful that Nick put this out because I immediately got on it and started researching, and I felt that this was a very important for our show today. Nick, what just discussing, we were actually discussing the very first topic but we kind of just jumped into the disability part topic, but it was about the Housing Act topic and how the Housing Act actually passed the bill at, very high majority. And we're talking about 358 to 32 in the House of Representatives, as well as I don't remember. I think it was only 5 senators that descended from the vote, but it's going to be canceled.
Yes. Because Trump is a racist and a misogynist and hates women and hates people of color, hates people of disability status. He's a hateful person. And hateful people will do hateful things when they feel they're about to lose power and when they are losing power and losing control. And we know that at Trump has at least severe narcissistic tendencies, and I would say verging on megalomania, if not there. But I am not a medical doctor and I'm not a psychologist, so I cannot diagnose and I will not diagnose him. I'll preface that. I'm just a guy with disabilities myself. I'm just a guy who speaks out. And I have to say thank you to Nieta because she brought the decision to my attention right away. She messaged me and was like, "Holy shit, you need to see this." And since then, I have not stopped on this, and I'm not going to stop on this because I'm a disabled veteran. And getting back to the housing stuff, that would impact me too as a disabled veteran. That would impact Naida. That would impact Zora. That would impact so many of us. And the fact that they passed it by that large of a margin shows that pressure worked to get them to do something, which means we have work to do here on other issues. But the fact that he's tying it to restrictive voting and suppressive voting measures shows just how scared he is of the people. And when people come together to force their representatives to do something, we get Congress to have overwhelming votes in the majority that are veto proof unless they decide to put both houses of Congress into recess for over 72 hours. And then there's some fuckery that goes on. I'm sorry if you don't normally swear on your show.
As I informed Nita, if you take a look at the name of my publication, it's called Zora's Bullshit Free Zone. So that kind of tells you where I
Okay.
stand on colorful language or colloquialisms or whatever way you want to fucking to call it. But
It's fuckery what they're doing. They're messing with freedoms. This entire process that the Trump regime is going through right now to force the Save Act vote in any way they can shows just how scared they are because the people are waking up. You can see it. People are mad. People are desperate, are getting desperate. We're nearing desperation for a lot of folks, if not already there or and
I was
well
already
beyond.
there. I was already there
But we're
January the
nearing
20th.
desperation for folks that look like me and you, Zora, on the outside, because others have
They
been
have
there,
unless they have disabilities
unless they have
I,
disability.
or they're
unless
marginalized in other ways, because I do wanna be
correct.
clear on that because it's not all white folks
Yes,
who
agreed.
feel this way, and I say this like I have white people in my family by marriage and by not some of my relatives are not half non-white Hispanics. So I
Yeah,
do
and
wanna say that here.
yeah, and I wanna make sure I'm clear on that too, is Naida and I talk about this a lot, is it's not all, and it can't be because that hurts marginalized communities the most. When we say things like all men, and I'm not saying that to protect myself, because it doesn't bother me. It doesn't impact me
But it
specifically.
does
It
bother
does, but it
It does
does
bother
bother.
some men. It
but
does
it does
bother.
actually bothers me, and I'm not a man. I don't
Yeah,
take
and it bothers people that are important to me
Mhm.
and that I'm friends with in ways that I'm not going to perpetrate it because I'm not going to perpetrate putting down or marginalizing people who are already marginalized and can't come up. Oh, it's all, Lynette, this is going to be all about race and disability. It all ties together.
And it
All
does all
none
Blanche.
of it is separate,
It all,
unfortunately.
eugenics
yeah.
is eugenics just FYI everybody, eugenics is a pseudo racist science. It's pseudo race science based in racism and ableism. And
Hmm.
ableism is based in racism. And so when disabled folks who don't look who are not black or brown on the outside, right? because I do have more European than it appears on my face. Um,
That's another whole discussion
yeah, that's
about
another whole discussion,
yeah,
but I think it's important, like, for people, and also I have class privilege too, right? Like, this also gets into class privilege, why this memo has freaked me out so much, because I have people who volunteer for my organization that rely on caregivers. One of them's in a group home, um, you know, because her parents can't lift her anymore, can't take care of her anymore and do the heavy lifting and stuff. And we don't have the beds. Like, this is the problem when they issue a memo like this and there aren't beds. They're going to, because we don't have the beds, and I've said this to Nick, they're gonna put people in prisons and
homeless.
ICE detention, or, and people who are homeless. I mean, it's all of this is tied together, and until we, the people, start unifying and understanding that we all don't have to agree. Like, for me, like, I'm gonna just, for example, I have personal issues with abortion and how it's used sometimes with people with disabilities because, the whole genetic testing thing. I am not totally fully like people should have access to abortion 100% of the time, right? I think there needs to be some limits. I also don't think it should be between their doctor, and the doctor should not be going to jail for trying to save somebody's life, right? Like,
Absolutely.
that's and we have to have these nuanced conversations. Why in conservative spaces, why there are actually more kids with disabilities? Because of religion, really, right? They don't believe in it, and there are people like me who feel like people do use abortion as a form of eugenics. That's why we don't have little people anymore in society. That's why we don't have, we don't see as many people with Down syndrome. There's, like, certain types of disabilities you don't see anymore because people get genetic testing, and they do that. And so they're linked, but they're not perfectly linked, a lot of these issues, and so we need to also talk about it in terms of nuance, and I've been saying this a lot. I've been screaming this to the cows come home. Until the Black community deals with its ableism and actually deals with the fact that it leaves Black disabled folks behind in liberation, and they are not talking about it. They didn't even talk about access to when 208 was declared, when private action for 208 in 2025 by the 8th Circuit, was declared, like, nope, private entities can't sue under Section 208. Nobody talked. I did not hear a peep from any Black org, none. But as soon as Section 2, it's like the expectation is disability orgs are supposed to be speaking out, and I'm like, "You don't speak out on our issues either," and I will say this, I've experienced more ableism than racism in my life, and I've experienced more homophobia than racism in my life, so, and I'm
And
just
that
saying
being
it first.
because of where you're located?
No, because 'cause I've traveled all over the country.
All
I've lived
right.
in different parts of the country. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest. I live in, and also New England, like, New England's a subregion of the Northeast, and there is differences within, because Nick
I'm from Vermont originally, so I know.
so he knows, there's, like, subcultures, like, in the Northeast. Like, New England operates very differently than the other states in the Northeast in terms of how they operate, and so it's also, I grew up with class access. I grew up in the suburbs, so I'm a suburban kid, and most of my schools were majority white with access to services, and so that does matter. It matters, and I've heard this. I'm not the only one who's talked about this. I have friends who live in the South who are Black who have said the same thing to me, that they've experienced more ableism than racism, and they are from the South. They've never really left the South, and so this is not
Just
just
yeah, I didn't mean to
No, it's fine. It's
just
fine. You
popped
asked
up
you
into
asked
my head.
you asked the question. It's reasonable to ask the
just
question because I don't live in the South. You would have
just
you
popped
would
up into
think.
my head, basically, because I am white, and so I wouldn't know, you know, that answer from my
Right.
perspective, you know? So, that's the reason why I asked it.
Mhm.
Um,
I'll show
I
my little coffee mug here because I think it hits that point, is now you know so you can grow, is we have to learn. We have to be willing to ask questions and learn from each other. Like, that's my whole experiment right now, is asking
learning
questions and
agility,
learning. Yeah,
learning
is the ability
agility.
to, yeah, like, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I want to be right when I talk, not because of an ego thing, but because I would rather be right than wrong. Like, I'd rather have right information and good context and know things than just be willfully ignorant.
You don't want to spread mal, and disinformation. That's
Correct.
really what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to spread the truth. And I want to hear from stories from people. And I think getting
Oh,
to the
yeah.
heart of the Olmsted thing is this impacts across all communities.
Now, because Substack doesn't allow some of these notes to be, you won't see them when we end this program, basically. So I do want to go through some of the comments and making sure that we're covering everything. And I kind of have to go way far back because they started coming in. So give me a moment.
And Zora, while you're doing that,
So
I'm going to drop in.
Karma basically says this is taking way too long, you know. The fact that things have to get to this extreme measures for people to wake up is insanity. And I agree with you, Karma. It is taking way too long. But most people don't realize this is going on. And this is part of the reason why we're having this show right now. In order for people to wake up, you have to know what is going on. And so we're having this show so we can get people to wake up. Joe basically says one can be multi marginalized. That is absolutely true. You know, I agree with that sentiment exactly. And someone else said, "Hey, wait, when did this become a race discussion?" Well, I'm going to say this right now. If we don't discuss about race, then how are we going to be able to move forward? It's sort of like saying, well, all lives matter. It's Black Lives Matter. What I would like to say in regards to Black Lives Matters, until Black Lives Matter, then can all lives matter.
Can I also respond to what that person said as well?
Right.
So, in our country's history, we have we have weaponized disability around race. So there's something called riptomania, you, by this white doctor in the 1850s that slaves would run away and they would say they were mentally ill because they wanted to be free. And so they talked about cutting off people's toes so they couldn't run away. So if we don't talk about race in terms of disability, and also I'm just gonna be honest, it's a disingenuous comment because the people who are gonna be disproportionately impacted by this Olmsted memo are gonna be people who look like me that don't have the same access, and either in terms of wealth or education to be able to advocate for themselves. And I don't it's disingenuous to say that race doesn't play a role in any of this in our history, and it always has been this way. If you look at our history of our country, the civil rights movement, every single time there has been movement, has always been there's been some sort of tragedy, some sort of protest, something. So the country has always we have willful ignorance programmed into our country's DNA. So I just want to just say that to people if that makes sense.
Yeah, because race plays a role in everything that is going on. It doesn't have to be obvious that it's race. It's built into our system. Like, it is built into the structure of our system is racism and classism and ableism. We've allowed those to be built into our system. And we have to talk about them hand in hand because they're all from the same hate. It's all based on the same idea of superiority and hate and marginalizing people. That's why that's why I talk about it. Like that's why we expand on it. Like I ensure that I talk about these things because I'm invisibly disabled. Like I'm disabled in an invisible way. You don't see my disabilities as much. I don't walk. I don't have a walker. I don't have a wheelchair. I'm not missing a limb. I am not physically disabled in a way that's physical. I'm not mentally disabled in a way that's physical. And if we forget to talk about all those things, we leave all of those people behind. Like Naida said, until we can, and I can't say it about the Black community, but I can say it about the white community, is until we care about white disabled kids, none of us matter in this case right now because we're all going to be impacted. Until we care about the most marginalized among us, none of this really matters. We lift each other up from the bottom. When we raise the standard of living and we raise the level of society, everybody benefits. But we
Everybody.
have to do it intentionally. We have to do it with the intent to make life equitable and equal for those in our society. That means we have to talk about where it impacts the most. It's why redlining is still a fucking big issue because that's racism built into our system. That's why the data center discussions that we are talking about right now are also really important because that is a new form of redlining.
And that's also
That is,
right. It's a
Yeah, and
new
it's
form of
taking
redlining.
place in poor communities. It's taking place in areas that they think we will not notice. They're taking place in areas in which the people don't necessarily have a voice, you know.
and if we
And
have a voice, we're going to use it.
that's
Right.
right.
And it's environmental racism. Just a lot of Black people who are disabled weren't necessarily born with disabilities, but because of their environment that they live in, they develop asthma, all sorts of things that hey, like
That would not
why
have taken place.
it blows my mind as a suburban kid where even the poorest neighborhoods in my city did not have the same rates of it, because economically they were, if you compare economically to New York City, but because in New York City they had higher the whole everything that I grew up with, right? Like we had green space. Even if you lived in a poorer neighborhood, you can go to like walk to get to, neighborhoods that had green space, right? And so I think people got to got to like understand that. The one thing I will say, you know, before I know Jason's trying to come in and I don't know if it's going to be a problem or not getting
Yeah, there's the three people on right now, so it's going to be hard to get Jason to come in.
so
So,
I actually have something I have to do, so I gotta hop off. But the one thing I will say to everyone here today, in terms of the work that my organization is doing specifically, we are fighting for liberal democracy no matter who's in power, right? Because I know, like we're trying to pull on threads in all sorts of different directions. And I know a lot of people are saying this current occupant is the problem and his co-conspirators is the problem. No, it's actually both political parties are racist and ableist, and one's more blatant than the other. And the difference is, and I say this as somebody whose politics is, more moderate, more, even more than our one of our mutual friends. I lean uh, more to the right around, and especially around issues of restriction access to guns and stuff like that, right? Like that's just my personal beliefs on that because I know what happens when we restrict things. It harms people with disabilities. We don't talk about these things. We don't talk about these things with nuance. And so until we do, I'm like, no. Right. And so my thoughts are is that until we fight for liberation for all people, because they always say, well, Black people are the canaries in the coal mine. I don't I don't agree with that. I don't agree, and I'm saying this as somebody who is a partially Black American. I don't agree with that. I say the disability community are the canaries in the coal mine because it took us the longest to actually get our rights at the federal level
Level.
versus even LGBTQ folks. I'm not talking about the right to marry or anything like that, but I'm saying specifically civil rights. It was a disability community. It took another 20 years for the students were segregated. So if you were
Yeah.
a Gen Xer born between 1965 and 1973, you were in that transition stage. You might have been in segregated education for disabilities, or you didn't get educated at all. My part of Gen X, I'm mid 74 and on, they couldn't do that anymore. My generation and elder millennials, I want to lump them in together because there's a lot of similarities
Yeah,
there,
I agree.
have that piece in common where we were the first really not to, be segregated. And then I grew up under, I was in middle school when the ADA got signed. So more rights were expanded for me as a disabled student. And so I'm not just trying to fight to keep what we have. I'm trying to make sure that we raise the floor. And I am going to say this, there are a lot of especially like people who have been in this space for a long time, who are disabled, who I've like mentioned this to, and they're afraid to open the ADA. And I'm like, this is the same conversation we've had around, Black folks who are members of the LGBTQ community who've wanted to open up the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I'm like, look, we cannot be afraid because we've tried. If we look at the history of our country, look at the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. We've had 3 bills: Civil Rights Acts in 64 and 68, and Voting Rights in 65. We don't have voting rights anymore. They gutted it with removing Section 2 and Section 5 Supreme Court. They're chipping away at disability. We just need a comprehensive civil rights bill for everyone and let them try. Because like Epstein, right? And this is where I go, like, yeah, the housing bill, yeah, there was momentum, but this is really for me like Epstein. We need every single media outlet on Substack to be talking about this. Stop talking about the purity politics of this person's a um shitty Republican because they're not Democrat. I'm like, how does that help us when they're going to round us up and say that we have, protest psychosis because we're resistant? None of that helps because all of us, regardless of where we are politically, because we don't want to deal with the current occupant and his co-conspirators and his BS, like, it's not going to matter. They're going to take us all. So stop.
Yeah, little by little.
That's where I'm at.
Little
That's
by
where I'm
little.
at. That's where I'm
Little by
at.
little. So, Nieta, thank you for joining us. I'm more than happy to have you on again, but I know you have something to take care of, and I'm going to bring in Jason. And at the end of this conversation, I do want to finish it up with some actionables that people can actually take along with making those phone calls. So,
Nick can actually talk about that because it's actually a joint action between my organization, Disability Community for Democracy, Sick of This Shit Publications. Can I brag on myself for a minute before I go?
Absolutely.
So Disability Community for Democracy has a publication called Nothing About Us Without Us. Disability Community for Democracy is 100% run by volunteers. We do not receive any funding from anybody but our subscriptions and people purchasing stuff from our store every so often. We now have shirts in our store that say no to Crip Crow and no to Jim Crip Crow because there is this pipeline, especially in poorer communities, but even in wealthier communities, that if you're a person of color and disabled, it's a special ed to to prison pipeline. So I made shirts for that for Disability Pride Month. I said no to Crip because of everything that was happening for Disability Pride Month. Those shirts are available. If you go to Nothing About Us Without Us, you click on the store link, it will take you to a website. All of that money does not go into my personal pocket, it goes into operating funds to fight back with all of our administrative costs. We are incorporated, so we have to pay for email and website and all of that. I was self-funding this last year, and this year, most of the expenses are covered by our subscription. So if you can afford to become a paid subscriber, do so. If you can, if you purchase the shirts, everything helps us. Also, the scripts that we're using, I wrote them. I wrote the scripts because Nick asked me to write them, which I was kind of surprised because I think Nick is a better writer than I am. But I think I might be.
I'm going to write the next ones and ask for your opinions back on them.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be more definitely collaborative throughout all of this. And I
Yeah.
really thank you for those scripts too.
So
And I
it's
do do some script writing myself. I put out one of the links, but I'm actually on the notes after we're completed today. I always do air notes, and within the air notes, I'm going to include some of those scripts as well, because people like scripts. It helps them to know what words to use in order to even when they're making the phone calls. So definitely, we'll put it out. I'll put out your Substack page. I'll put out all the information within the notes. So everybody will have that information. Once again, thank you for coming on board with us. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope to have you on again
and
in
I
the
really
future.
appreciate it. I'm glad that we were able to like link the threads together because I do think that the housing thing is going to screw us because we need more affordable housing because we need specifically
It's bad.
more affordable, accessible housing specifically. Like I need it because I'm on a walker and use a cane and struggle getting in and out of the tub. So
No, I absolutely get it. I am a IHSS worker for my older son who suffers from epilepsy, who's had a variety of health issues, who is disabled, who would need housing. I would never want to see him out on the street. There are as many things that, this scares me. And to link it up with the SAVE Act as well, it's just taking more rights away from the people. So definitely more than welcome to come on board. I do agree that we're not discussing it enough. I do agree that we're not taking enough action in order to stop this occupants, as you would say, I call it the regime, to stop what they're
the
doing
language is
now.
semantics. The language
Right.
is
It's
semantics
really
around the language.
semantics at this point. So thank you once again. Pleasure meeting you, by the way.
Pleasure meeting you, Nick. I will talk to you soon. Peace out.
Sounds good. Talk to you, Nieta.